Hey y'all, I'm Steve, and hey y'all. Um, we got a bunch of stuff to talk about today. We're going to start with the title, and I'm also going to disappoint you on multiple occasions. So I'm going to try and raise my hand when I think I'm going to disappoint you, just so I can let you know that I'm aware of when the disappointing moments are. One of them is right now. I'm not at any point going to, in this talk, give you a list of tools that you should start to use. Those of you that are here for that, I am so sorry. We have really good pizza. That's what I'm going to deliver to you then. If you're looking for a list of tools, we're out. If you're looking for some obscure references to 15th century handwriting, I'm your guy. I promise we're going to get there at some point, and I have a whiteboard marker in my pocket at any moment just in case. So we're going to start with the title here. Brad came up with it. Thank you. Actually, I think Claude came up with it. So this is our title for the day. Human-centered design and AI, is this paradox or progress? Here is my hypothesis or my starting point. I believe there is a way for us to jump into the paradox as human-centered design practitioners and still thrive. There is a paradox that exists because the tension between the way things learn and work now versus the way that we have taught and practiced human-centered design over time, there is a tension in between those that feels like a paradox. I think there is room for us to jump into the middle of that, truly thrive, and create new things. So let's talk about how I think that might work. So, first of all, a couple of ground rules or a couple of sort of frames to start the day. The first is this: when we say AI, it's literally getting infinite what you could mean by those two letters. And so I'm going to give you a way that I think about it. Actually, I'm going to give you two ways, but I'm going to break them up here. One is going to be rules of what we are and are not talking about, and one is going to be, let's give a framework for how we should think about this. So the first one, how we are and are not going to be talking about this today. In my day-to-day life here at Cabin, I have a team and we work together to do strategy work, innovation work, product work. Love it every single day. When we talk about AI, though, there's really three places that it can live inside of a place that we work. So I'm going to take off the table all the things that's not really work. The fun that I have playing with it with my daughters, the fun that we have out in our normal lives. When I talk about work, though, there's typically three places that we see it show up. One is in the way that we run our business. And that is things like, can we process invoices more quickly? Can we run HR functions through an HR buddy that's a chatbot? Those kind of things. There's ways to work on the business and in the business that we are doing. Second is essentially in what we offer to our clients, the literal products and services that are out there. That's another way to think about grouping AI. A third one is the way that we actually practice our craft. We can apply AI tools, frameworks, capabilities in all three of these environments, basically making our business run better, offering different things to our clients, or in the way that we actually practice the work that we do. I'm going to focus today on the way that we practice our craft, the way that we do our work. So there might be times where it spills over and you think of a way that this could apply in one of the other categories, but that's accidental fun. If you're here to figure out how to process your invoices more quickly, not your guy. That's not me. Jeremy, let's find him. That's your guy. So I'm raising my hand right there. If you're looking for that, that's a disappointment. I am here, though, to explore the how do we practice our craft and use new tools in that environment. So for the rest of our time, what I want to think about is what questions should we be asking ourselves as we adopt new tools into our human-centered work? And this is where the whiteboard comes into it, because I think there are two dynamics that are always at play when we talk about the new world of AI that we are exploring and the new ways that it applies to the work that we do. And I want to explore what those two dynamics are, what we can learn from those two dynamics, and sort of questions we can ask ourselves in making them work. So here they are. I'm going to yell. Can you hear me if I yell from the whiteboard? Awesome. I'll go back there in just a second so I'm not yelling all night long. I think we can measure on one axis the capacity that we have to do work. Capacity. We can talk about AI's ability to automate the work that we do. So I'm going to measure automation on this axis right here. All right, automation, with low automation being down here and high automation being up here. This is things that we can measure in speed and agency. Basically, does it go faster? Does it get easier? Can someone else do it or something else do it for me? That's what automation is. It is a measure of capacity. Our other one right here, I'm going to measure augmentation, which is about capability. I realize I'm writing words up here. To you, they might not appear to be words. In my mind, those are actually letters that fit into words. Augmentation is a measure of capability. Can we do new things? Things we couldn't do before, or things that we can do better than before, in a way we couldn't before. So this down here is low augmentation, and this is high augmentation. So this is not a finite, this is infinite moving this way, infinite moving this way. So everything that is in here is measuring some degree of increasing automation and increasing augmentation. So if something is down here, it might be low automation and low augmentation, but we're assuming that it is enhancing those in some way, shape, or form. This is not to measure complete absence or perfection up here, something like that. So therefore, we are not aiming for up and to the right, where every graph says you should go. That's not what we're trying to measure here. We're not trying to move you just to up and to the right. What I want to do is talk about when we live with capabilities and tools and opportunities in these categories, in these quadrants, what can we learn about the work that we do and what we are trying to be capable of doing because of living in that space? How should we deal with things differently if I'm living down here versus living up here? First of all, does that make sense? There are way other ways, like so many other ways that we could talk about measuring and understanding how AI and new tools, emerging technologies impact us. I'm just choosing today to put it in these two frameworks. So if you want the z-axis to come out this way with another one, awesome, write it down, show me what it is. I can't wait to see what it is. Raise my hand that I'm going to disappoint you. I'm not working in 3D today. I'm working in 2D. So I think that we can give some shorthand names to these areas and start to talk about the tools that we use. This is the closest I'm going to get to giving you a list of tools, but we can give you characteristics of tools that live in these spaces, because I think it changes how we work when we think about the kinds of tools and capabilities that are increased because of working in these spaces. So I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to see it, but these are our 4 quadrants up here, and I'm going to give you names for them. I'm going to reveal them all at once. We can talk through them in a second here. I will make these slides available so you can look at the finer points of all of these things. But if we look at, let's say, see if I can carry this with me so I'm not yelling constantly. If we look at this lower left-hand quadrant, which is the low automation and low augmentation area, I call this the recorder space. And this is making things moderately easier to do and moderately better. The way that this shows up for me on a daily basis is the magic, which is live transcription in user interviews or in calls that we've got or in meetings that we're in. When we don't ask it to do any thinking for us whatsoever, it's just on the very bare edge of it's taking a little bit of load off of what we used to do. I came across a set of interview notes I'll talk about this again later. I couldn't imagine. I mean, I'm looking at this, trying to figure out how did I have that much power in my hand to write that many notes in that short a time as I went through that user interview. The amount that I tried to get so that I could get literal verbatims down that I could refer to months and months and months later. The recorder section, the goal there is to essentially automate the tiniest of tasks. So that's our recorder section, capture without interpretation. Let's move to the right. We're going to call this quadrant 2. So quadrant 1, quadrant 2, this is our dispatcher. This one I see showing up in the automatic routing of tickets. It is super high automation, not a lot of thinking involved. You can set a couple of rules and just say, sort these for me, depending on rules that I've already set for you. So don't do a lot of thinking for me, just follow a lot of rules for me. It makes it way faster, way easier, and way more hands-off for me. Sort my tickets. So this is about speed and operational efficiency. It's automatic tagging of artifacts and those kind of things. So, I forgot to give you tools in the bottom left-hand corner, things like Zoom transcription, user testing recordings, Loom videos, the simple ones where you're just translating something that somebody else can see and there's transcription that goes on it or referencing that happens on it. If you haven't played that part of Loom, it's fantastic. In the lower right though, dispatcher, some of the example tools are maze routing, user interviews routing. This is ServiceNow routing of tickets that come in, those kind of things. So routing based on rules that we have already written. It's not coming up with new rules, it's just doing routing based on what we tell it to do. Upper left, I'm going to call it 3. This is the lens. This is when things start to become a thinking partner for us to some degree. So this is the lens, and this is hopefully going to reveal a little bit of things that you can't see. In the dumbest version, this is things like Miro clustering. When you got 75,000 stickies all in one place, you circle them and you say, organize these for me, and it does an okay job. Not a great job, does an okay job. FigJam does a different okay job. I compared them next to each other and wow, they come up with wildly different conclusion of what matches up to each other, but they'll give you a great first draft. It's a thinking partner, not a thinking sort of do it for you kind of situation. So this is the lens over here. And so reveals what you couldn't see, thematic clustering from feedback, that kind of thing. The upper right-hand corner is the multiplier. So the multiplier is the situation where it extends your reach and scale by both increasing your capability to do something and actually making you less hands-on with what you are doing. So examples of this is we've seen synthetic users, we've seen synthetic personas, we've seen AI testing, we've seen attention insight. Anybody played with that tool? That's super interesting with heat maps that are generated from synthetic users. Super interesting to have it think for you, essentially use thousands of different ways that eye tracking happens, apply it to a site that you're building or a tool that you are building, and have it spit out something probably that you couldn't have done in that amount of time. So this is our multiplier, where it's increasing our capability and decreasing our hands-on time. So all of this framework is just getting me to here. I think there's a question that we should be asking ourselves when we identify a tool that we are using that lives in one of these quadrants. That's what I want to walk through just for a second here is, what question should we be asking when we are living in one of these quadrants? You're probably already playing, if you're at a talk about AI, you're probably already playing in all 4 of these in some way, shape, or form. Maybe you're really good at some, maybe you're really terrible at some. You're playing with some, you've incorporated some as actual tools that you want to use on a regular basis. What I want to know is, when we live in these, what questions does it become vital for us to ask? So, question 1, when we live in the recorder section, what are we no longer noticing because what we're doing now feels effortless? I mentioned before that I love taking notes by hand. I have notebooks all over my house. My wife is in the back and she can identify the fact that I have boxes on boxes on boxes on boxes of notebooks because I love writing everything by hand. Love it. I loved doing user interviews where you're literally writing down everything you can possibly get out of this interview. I do way way fewer notes now in those environments. It has freed me up to truly pay attention to what is happening, the nuance of the conversation, and how the face changes when they answer a question where when my head was down and I was writing, I lost a lot of that. However, I came across a stack of notes from a very old interview recently, and I realized that I had taken, oh, I took some of them out of my pocket. I typically have 3 different colors of pens in my pocket, and I had taken notes from this interview in 3 different colors, categorizing as I went what I thought I could do with this quote or this sentiment, this thought. And reviewing back to what I was thinking in the moment when I was the human processing it was really valuable. And I'm wondering now, sometimes when I am watching for the facial inflection or something like that and letting somebody else transcribe or something else transcribe, am I missing that moment to categorize it in red or in blue or something like that to give me an indication for later, this is important, listen to it. So the question I want to ask, and it's not because it's bad to do it this way, I just want to keep in my mind, what am I no longer noticing because I'm embracing the effortlessness of this? Am I losing the nuance of the notes? That's my personal. Am I losing the nuance of the notes? Second one, on the dispatcher. Question for the on the dispatcher. When things are fast and usually right, what do we lose in the ability to see or question what is happening? So I was working on a project that was implementing a ticket dispatch system, a ticket moderation system for relatively mundane tasks and all of that. And it wound up being relatively easy to create a really beautiful rule set of, hey, if this request comes in, here's where it goes. Here's how we know that it goes to the next step, and those kind of things. Set up the rules, set it and forget it. Man, it took hours and hours and hours away from the people that used to route those tickets. What I realized, though, is we lost the ability to, at any given point, ask the question, is this right? Or is this done, with a simple yes, no. We have to assume that it read the rules in the right way and did the right thing with it, and we rarely can ask back to the original user, did it work the way you wanted it to? It requires a whole new step or a whole new level of intentionality to validate that the rules worked the way they were supposed to work. So when we're living in the dispatcher space where we're not asking it to think for us really, we're just asking it to follow the rules and get hands off or do it faster or something like that. We need to ask ourselves, when this is fast and usually right, what do we lose in the ability to see or question what's happening while it's happening? The third one, the lens, or apparently a guy named Len. In the lens, how is this tool shaping my judgment or my choices? I feel like we could spend a solid half an hour just on this one right here. Because as human-centered designers, as researchers, as builders, we have built tools on tools on tools on tools to do this job. Help me synthesize. Help me take almost infinite amount of inputs, because we have found in the bottom left and in the bottom right, it is easier and easier and easier to get inputs into our process. We can suck it up like a vacuum. It used to take weeks and months to get just the barest amount of feedback and input. Now you can get that really, really, really fast. The problem becomes, how do you synthesize it? How do you get through it all? We need to ask ourselves the question, when we ask a tool to do that for us or to help us with that, how is it shaping my judgment or the choices that I make? We do something around here which is like a BattleBot version. If I ask anything in, let's say, ChatGPT, if I ask it to complete a task or synthesize something for me or whatever, we create a BattleBot scenario, which is, I'll do that, I'll take the output, take the same prompt, take a little bit of that context and put it into Claude, and then we put it into Llama, and then we put it into, and then we put it into, and we have them fight with each other and say, basically, what did it get wrong that you are getting right? What bias do you see in something else that you don't have? And they all have bias, and we have bias. But getting them to battle it out helps me to understand, where is it taking over judgment that I used to be the one injecting in? I used to consciously try and pass tests of bias and judgment. I don't know if the tools that I'm using are doing that. So I want to be asking the question on a regular basis, how is this tool shaping my judgment or my choices? And the last one, when things get really complicated and we're multiplying our capabilities because we're both hands-off and doing new things, I want to ask, when a tool extends what I can do, what am I still responsible now? What am I still responsible for, both now and over time? That one feels a little bit abstract. I want to ask the question, when a tool extends what I am capable of, what am I still responsible for, both now and over time? So, in order to look at that, I want to introduce you to a word that you probably all know. The word is done. I want you to look very closely at this word done. Think about what you learned in like first grade, second grade about phonics. Does this word match up to the phonics lessons that you've learned? If you tried to pronounce this as a new learner of English, there's almost no way you would pronounce this done. Because if you take the D off, it's one, so it'd be dwan. Or if you follow the O-N-E, it would be own, so it'd be don. Or if you take some of the Spanish or French influences to our language, it would be done or something like that. But it would almost never be done. Now, when done was originally written, it actually was spelled like what it looks. It was spelled like this originally. This was done. Unfortunately, though, done was originally written like this. This is Old English script, generally what it looked like. I made it small so it would look more like handwriting. This is what it would look like. The problem is it just looks like a bunch of straight lines up and down. Another example of this spelling at the time is the word sum. Looked like this. Now it's 5 lines in a row with the U and the M next to each other. So let's go back to done. This is what it looked like. There was a problem to solve, which was this word was not very readable when written in handwriting. So slightly more flowery script was still just a collection of straight lines next to each other. And it was really difficult to read the word done or anything that was UN or UM. And so the writers of the time came up with a solution. And that solution was to replace that U with a top stroke letter, which was an O. So they replaced it like this, made it easier to read. Unfortunately, there was a very popular name at the time, which was Don. And so if you wrote this, it would be pronounced Don, not done. And so in order to further change it, it was translated to done like this. I'd like to introduce you to a concept that is based entirely on this letter right here. And the concept is, I'm going to call this O a Scrivener's O. The Scrivener was the person that would write and copy books before we could print them on a printing press. The creation and the use of this O in this way is called a Scrivener's O. It was solving a real problem at the time, and that real problem was done as D-U-N was not readable. Unfortunately now, 500 years later, it has created the word done, D-O-N-E, which if you don't already know what it's supposed to sound like, is really hard to pronounce. Not because it's hard to create the motions of your mouth or something, it's just literally doesn't follow the rules. So we've created, by solving one human-centered problem a long time ago, human-centered debt that we have to deal with now. So when we look at this upper right-hand corner of the multiplier and we ask, what responsibility do we have both now and later with the human-centered choices that we make, we have to answer to the Scrivener's O. And to me, the Scrivener's O is a human-centered solution that loses context over time and winds up creating new human experience debt. And I think the tools that we have started to use, this has always been around. This isn't an AI thing. This has always been around, but the tools that we are creating and using now speed up the process and take out the moments where we would discover these things and avoid them. So I'm going to give you 2 tests that we should start to follow. I have started to follow them. When we create these workarounds or these what we think are human-centered solutions, so we don't create more Scrivener's O's. The first one is, it's a dumb question, but truly, is our solution truly human-centered? The reason I ask this is, I have heard more and more and more, instead of here's the pain I'm solving for, here's the human need that we need to meet, I hear, it just works better this way. There is deep danger in buying into things that just work better this way, instead of can be identified as solving a direct human need or meeting direct human pain. So I want to know, can we name the pain we're solving for? Is this just a better way? I worked on a project a bunch of years ago, and we had sort of like a theme song that was the beginning of almost every meeting we had. And that was, we talked about the fact that we were dealing with a pretty ticky-tacky process, but we were dealing with the fact that we could make things easier and better for the developers and for the employees. But we had to realize that easier and better for us didn't always mean easier and better for the user. And to me, that is a great example of having to try and remember the responsibility that we have to not create debt for somebody else when we solve a problem for us. So that's my first test. Is our solution truly human-centered, or are we just trying to make something that works better? Second test. Is there a new cost baked into our solution? Basically, are we shifting the burden or the work that we're doing to someone else down the road? For example, are we making done harder to pronounce for an English learner? So these are not high-tech questions, but I think they're worth putting on the sticky that is on your desk in front of you as you run that planning session, or you run the solutioning session, or you run the brainstorming to say, are we creating new debt that is down the line? So 2 quick tests for when we're in that multiplier space, or really living in any of these, about whether we are creating not just solutions today, but human debt that will show up down the line. When AI gets involved, things speed up, and we lose the moments to ask these questions that we're used to asking. So it begs the question for me that if we're talking about all the different ways that we could implement and use these incredible new tools, what do we need to actually develop in ourselves and in our craft to be able to do them better? And I'm not talking about actually learning how an individual tool works, because, man, if I could tell you how half of these things work, I'd make a lot more money than any of us in this room do right now. Because you have to learn an entirely new frame for every single one that's out there. That's not what I'm asking about. I'm asking about, what are the capabilities that we're going to need to nurture in us to remain the human in the loop that is, oh gosh, human in the loop. There, yeah, bingo, there we go. That's your AI bingo right there, human in the loop. Anyway, I want to know, what are the capabilities that we need to be aware that we need to build into the way that we work so that we can overcome the debt that AI is placing onto us with human-centered design. So many of you have probably seen something that has shown up on LinkedIn about 30 times in the course of the last week and a half, 2 weeks. And it is a post from a principal engineer at Google, and it reads like this. Many of you have probably seen it, probably seen discourse about it, and it is this. I'm not joking, and this isn't funny. We have been trying to build distributed agent orchestrators at Google since last year. There are various options. Not everyone is aligned. I gave Claude Code our current description of the problem, and it generated what we built last year in an hour. How many of you have heard an example of, hey, we had this thing, and then Claude Code built it for me in 2 hours? We've all heard some version of the, man, I've been struggling with this problem, finally sat down, it solved it for me in 30 minutes, or let's say it solved me for a day or whatever. We have this majesty of the Claude code, and sorry for using the brand of that, but insert tool here, Claude Code built it in 2 hours. Yay! Awesome! I love it. This is fantastic. Unfortunately, most of you, and I've worked with a lot of you in this situation before, realize that Claude Code is not the only thing that's involved in this process. If we look at that tweet or I don't know what you call it if it's not a tweet, that thing from the principal engineer that says basically, we worked on this problem for a year and then I sat down with Claude Code and it did it in 2 hours. Feels to me like you set up the problem and your understanding of that problem for a year, and then somebody helped you for 2 hours. What would it have looked like if you had put Claude Code at the beginning of that year? Those of us that are invested in this on a day-to-day basis realize that we wrestle with the problem for a very, very long time before we can describe it in the way we need to describe it for something else to help us solve it. So in this scenario, I am most concerned not with the Claude Code part, which, gosh, I love watching when that works beautifully. I'm concerned with this part right here. It might get smaller, it might look different, but this process always needs to exist. And if you don't identify with what this looks like being the process that we go through, I've got a workshop for you. Or at least I've got a hard problem for you to solve. I want to make sure that when we look at these tools, we don't look at the majesty only of the 2 hours, which is the, oh, I sat down and solved the problem with this really, really cool tool. I want to make sure that we embrace the chaos that happens before it, or the incredible order that happens before it, that gets us to a well-organized problem and a well-articulated need, or a well-imagined future that something can help us build. And so, new AI tools are arriving every day, and they are truly remarkable. But so far, they can only create new versions of things they've already seen or been taught to understand. Most of us understand this already. I want you to sit with it for a second. They can only create new versions of things they've already seen or been taught to understand. One of my favorite books in about 7th grade was a book called The West End Game. It's written by Ellen Raskin. If you haven't read it, you should read it now. I love this book. We've given it to other children in our neighborhood. I love this book so much. It's about a mystery that happens in a hotel. I love it. It's the best. Finished this book, read it again, read it again, read it again. Eventually, I sort of wore it out and I wanted to read another book. Majesty. This is what 6th or 7th grade is for. You got to read new books. And so I went and looked for more books by this author. There were almost no other books by this author. She wrote one book, won the Newbery Medal, all this kind of thing. Amazing book. I find one other short story that she has written and I go to read it. And the thing is a freaking horror novel, because here's the concept behind it. Little girl wakes up one day and realizes that she can bring to life anything that she can either imagine or draw. But it's a very literal superpower that she has. So in the first, let's say, chapter, she wants a horse. Doesn't get one for her birthday, so she decides to create one because of her power. She imagines the horse, and she's looking at it sort of at the 3/4 angle, where you're looking at it from sort of the front left leg. And as a result, she can't see the back right leg in her imagination. Doesn't add that to the horse, so when the horse shows up in real life, it's got 3 legs and just sort of a stump in the back and can't really run. She creates this horror universe of these things that she imagines but can't quite imagine the way they need to be, and they start to chase her. And so she imagines a house that she wants to escape into, and as she is rapidly imagining this house, she forgets to put a doorknob on the door. So she runs up to the door and is in total panic as these rocks that she has imagined that have eyes on them are chasing her down the road. She can't get in the door because there's no doorknob on the door. I think we are living in that book now. Maybe it just impacted me that deeply in 7th grade or whatever it was. I think we are potentially living in that world right now, where the limitations that we will have are not going to be the tools that we use. The limitations that we have is our ability to imagine the future that we want to have to exist. I realize that sounds really all kinds of cheesy, like up to waist, level of like wading through cheesiness. Like imagine a better future. That's not it at all. I mean, literally, can you imagine and describe something that does not exist yet? Or do you just know how to make something that you know exists a little bit better? The magic of human-centered design in the future will be harnessing the true ability to imagine things that something else will build. We are taking out the limitation. When I watch our developers at Cabin, I am blown away by what they are able to create, not just by their own incredible ability, but their ability to harness these new tools that magnify their capabilities almost magically. In the end, our ability to imagine what they build, though, will be the greatest limiter to the progress that we make in solving for the human pain that we noticed earlier. Our ability to imagine and describe a future state becomes the limiting factor. So how will we deliberately nurture imagination as a core capability? I want to give you 3 things that I think we should do to make sure that imagination does not escape us as tools take over. So first thing, these are not rocket science. These are not hard, but they have to be done with intention. So the first one is, I think we need to protect time and protect cycles for imagination. We've already talked about this, but tools optimize for the past. They understand what has already happened and what we can describe to them. So we need to actually make room for the unexpected. That takes actual time and that takes actual brain cycles. It doesn't happen by accident. I believe fully that imagination is not about sparks. Imagination is about intentionality. And so we need to create space for it. We need to create cycles for it. Second thing, we need to counterweight automation. We need to slow some steps down while others speed up. Tools are going to allow lots of things to speed up right now. And you can choose what it is that you want to speed up in your process, whether that's transcription or finding things or synthesis or agentification of some tasks or whatever it is. Speed is not going to be an obstacle or a problem. Are we able to slow down the steps that are available to us to give space to counterweight that automation, counterweight that speed? Allow imagination to have space to overcome what something else might be done automatically. And the third one, and this one is a little convicting, but we need to accept responsibility. We need to be accountable for the fact that there will be downstream consequences for the choices that we make now to solve for today's humans. We already know as designers that we don't have access to all the users that we need to talk to. It's almost impossible. So you're always solving for the known group. That magnifies when some of that gets automated. We need to accept responsibility for the fact that there will be downstream consequences of the choices that we make for the humans that we're aware of right now. The speed will make things very durable. The power of development that we have will make things last. Are we considering what the downstream consequences are that will create experience debt and human debt that someone else will have to pay? I think these are 3 worthwhile things to spend time considering in your process. Are you doing that? Are you protecting time and cycles for imagination? Are you trying to counterweight the automation that is crawling into our processes? And are you accepting responsibility for the fact that the choices that we make will have downstream consequences when we delegate to other tools? So let's close with this. I believe how we protect and practice the imagination required to tell the tools what to do next will be our calling card as human-centered designers. Imagination will be the key. I'd love to say it was some highly technical capability, but when it comes down to it, imagination will be the key. Our ability to describe what we want something to build, automate, or do will be the magic in us being able to harness new tools to solve real human problems. So, last thing is this. I had a really fun conversation yesterday morning. And what I learned from that conversation was I write down something that I learned from almost every conversation that I have with someone. There are pages and pages. I mean, Gio, I'm looking at you. I've got probably 15 pages after lunches that we've had where the goal was not for me to learn something, but gosh, you can't bump into him without learning something. So you write it down. The conversation that I had yesterday, Chris said to me at the end of every one of his interactions with Claude or ChatGPT or whatever tool, he actually asks it, what did we learn today? And where should I organize that? I love the what did we learn today? That alone was just like, oh gosh, let's bring the tools into helping us figure out what we learned. But then him saying, where should I organize that? Where should I put that? Where should I store that? How can I use that next? Not just the notebooks that you got to dig deep into, but the how will it come up to prod me so I can use what I have learned? Because we've got to use those learnings to imagine something better that can be built by something that magnifies, multiplies, and automates what we can do. So, lots of different weird frameworks to talk about there. Brad, I don't know if we want to do questions or what, but